Good morning. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm really learning from all of you. Okay, this presentation provides an overview about governance framework that is being developed by the National Ministry of Health of Argentina. And it would also discuss the impact of 2016's Young Ethical Guidelines and the challenges presented for its implementation. And this is a development for biobanks for research purposes, and it would also address to sample and data sharing. To start, the current research governance framework in Argentina consists of these two main documents. The ethical guidelines in biomedical research involving human subjects. This is promulgated by the National Ministry of Health. It gives ethical oversight over biomedical research and also health-related research. And it also gives governance to conduction of this research and standard reviews for ethics committees, its memberships and functions. The other document is the regulation for good clinical practices for clinical trials. And all these requirements are mandatory for any clinical trials, and they are prescribed in accordance with the ACH GCPs. It addresses the uses of biological material, the use, the transfer, and also the store, but in the context of a clinical trial. The ethical guidelines also address the use of biological material collected for a specific study, and also the secondary use of this biological material collected in the specific study. The informed consent sections provides the essential information that investigators must provide to prospective subjects, and it's essential to inform in specific studies the possible research uses, direct or secondary, the final disposition of samples when the study is concluded, and this it must specify if the specimens will be destroyed or details about the storage for future use, whether commercial products may be developed with these biological samples, and an investigator's statement that these biological specimens will not be commercialized. For secondary uses of this material, an ethics committee may authorize the secondary use if the original consent has specified first whether there will be any secondary use, the type of study that may be performed, the conditions under which investigators will be required to contact the research subject for authorization for secondary use. And this requirement is usually understood by ethics committees as an obligation for every secondary use, but it's not quite clear if it's always has to recontact the research participants. And the rights of subjects to request the destruction or anonymization of biological specimens. However, there's no legislation or guidelines related to biobank for research purposes, as well as data sharing for research purposes. There are several gaps in our current ethical guidelines. Biobanks and databanks are not mentioned in legal framework. There's no specific regulation for its authorization, operation, infrastructure, or even responsibilities toward donors. There are also no provisions for the use of biological material and related data obtained in the course of clinical care. There's nothing said about this, or the storage of this material. Waiver of consent for the use of biological material may not be permitted if it is linked to personal data, and it's not clear if legal framework allows a broad informed consent process. So this uncertainty has left biobanks, researchers, and research ethics committees with the responsibility of taking decisions on their own. No? And these situations carries the risk of different standards being applied and inadequate safeguards for the rights and welfare of donors. In Argentina, there are biobanks operating under international standards, mostly due to collaborative works, and there are also biobanks that are working with open consent or blanket consent without any conditions. And furthermore, the possibilities of contact with donors for future uses are very low, are very difficult. For these reasons, researchers, especially those working in the fields of genomic, have started calling for clearer regulatory guidance. And in 2016, the National Research Ethics Advisory Committee was set up to advise the Ministry of Health and other institutions. And this committee recommended to convene a technical commission to clear guidance on biobanking and data sharing. This commission is working since last year, and the purpose is to develop this framework that includes not only ethical, it will also include legal obligations for biobanks with research purposes and also sample and data sharing. The composition, we have the most interested stakeholders in this commission, have experts of biobanks, bioethicists, lawyers, researchers, and also representatives of the National Institutes of Cancer, the National Institutes of Ablation and Implantation, and the National Ministry of Science and Technology. At present, we are working together. Here's a representative, Fabian Arzuaga. Both ministers are working together in the development of this framework. The main concerns that the Commission has found. One relates to the meaning of biobanking and relating activities. In Argentina, there are many public and private biobanks. Even you have private collections that are not declared as official biobanks. And there's even a current initiative to create a public population, and all these are being developed without legal or ethical oversight. On second place, biobanks do not have proper governance systems that can ensure that ethical requirements are being observed. Particularly, these requirements are mostly related to informed consent process, access to information for donors, and feedback with donors. And another point that is very important, there's no currently legal requirement for the material transfer agreement. So in international collaborative works, local researchers may not have the possibility of negotiate favorable terms related to intellectual property rights and return of results, and also other benefits. So with the purpose of identifying the key points for the future regulation, 2016 Sion ethical guidelines have been very helpful, particularly Guideline 11 and Guideline 12 on collection, storage, and use of biological materials and related data, and personal data for research. Okay, the key points for these future regulations, and we started working with biobanks. No? Maybe data sharing is for another instance. The first place, the term biobank will refer both to large population biobanks and small biorepositories, and will include all existing biological material collection. As custodians of biological materials and data, for ensures that donor rights are observed, such as confidentiality, access to information, and feedback. In relation to governance system, the regulation will give guidance on governance mechanisms that are needed to protect donor rights and data material, this to achieve a harmonization between all the existing biobanks. And a broad consensus-taking promise will be permitted for unspecified future uses, and to ensure that the proposed agrees with the original donor's consent, there will be a mandatory review of an associated ethics committee. We are looking that a research ethics committee works together with the biobank, not any ethics committees. And related to MTA, the essential elements of the agreement will be specified, so we can allow our researchers and institutions to negotiate fair terms of conditions for secondary uses and return of results to our country. Okay. The development of the biobanking governance framework by the Ministry of Health is really an important political decision to support the advancement of biobanking in Argentina, though there are a number of aspects to improve in order to promote local and international collaboration. As I see in all other presentations, we share the same problems. There are limited resources for infrastructures such as technology, software, and hardware, and the training needs of specialized personnel to manage biological material and data. We also have this issue with researchers which are reluctant to share their data, specifically because of the lack of clear guidance about ownership, responsibilities, and donors protection. And in relation to data sharing, also the lack of resources for data management turns difficult the access to secondary uses. No? This would also talk in the presentation. Also, ethics committees are cautious in approving studies, particularly international works, in first place because broad consent may be in conflict with current ethical guidelines, and secondly, due to mistrust from a history of exploitations in LMICs. And regarding community engagement, research is required to better understand public views and attitudes toward the bankings. We have to use different strategies to engage our public and to achieve trust in biobanking. So in order to sustain effective and credible research in Argentina, there is a need for resources for infrastructure and specialized personnel to achieve responsible data and sample management, training for research to promote the benefits of data sharing and ethical requirements, training for members of ethics committees to ensure ethical review of studies using stored material data, and also in broad consent procedure, and research and strategies to promote public trust in biobanks and data sharing. As a last recommendation, I think all these issues could be expected as benefits from international research collaboration in terms of contribution to capacity building for research and review. And to achieve a collaborative partnership, as discussed by Ezequiel Emmanuel, Argentina must take the political decision of becoming a real partner. No? Health authorities should share the responsibility of defining a local research agenda so that we can ensure that the social value of the research propositions, and also identifying the capacity buildings and training needs that I mentioned before to start thinking of fair terms of negotiations in collaborative works. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. You said that the use of biological material should result in no financial gain. So does this mean that in these clinical trials there is no dealing with pharmaceutical companies and like this? Or what do you mean by this?
Our actual ethical guidelines, this means that you cannot commercialize. When you collect these specimens or your storage, you cannot commercialize directly. Now, what you do next is something that you have to inform in the informed consent process.
So it directly means that you cannot sell the same, but you can collaborate with pharma.
Exactly.